Bill, can you hear us?
Yes, now I can.
Do you want to let Brian know to jump out of the Teams and try to get into the Zoom?
Yeah, I'll try to get a hold of him.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm.
Well, it's good to see everybody. It's been a little while. We got we got some
Yeah.
we got some stuff to go over. Um,
Pete's joining us too.
oh, there he is. Okay, cool. Morning,
Good
Pete.
morning.
Morning, Pete.
Morning. Sorry about that.
Were you guys expecting Dan at all?
No, Dan unfortunately texted yesterday. He cannot make the meeting today.
Okay.
So we're gonna give him an update on Saturday because we have a Board of Oversight meeting. But
Gotcha.
because there are multiple members of the Board of Oversight on here, Joyce, do you want to call a meeting to order? You're muted.
Okay, hi.
Hi.
It's a good idea. We'll officially call the meeting of the South County Senior Center Board of Oversight meeting with Trevor and myself present and the folks from our wonderful feasibility study committee. That's really the only item on our agenda here today. So I will turn it over to I don't know if Jen or someone from the team is best to take over next, but I'm relinquishing control and feeling good about it.
All
Jen, I
right,
can
Brian.
Jen, I can kind of take it and run with it if you're good with that.
Great, wonderful for me.
So, the last time we met, we had a program that we reviewed with the group. I sent out some updated documents just before the meeting, just so everybody has, the documents in front of them that they can review then after the discussion, if you guys are so inclined. And what we had mainly accomplished last meeting was taking the overall program that, Doug and I had worked on and started to put priority on each item. And that's what you guys saw in the updated documents that I sent out, was trying to list out, the different pieces and parts that we've discussed and identify, what does the high priority spaces look like? What would that size of a building look like? What would it look like for, the high and the medium combined? And then, we have the low priority that we really haven't been looking at. So what we did with those documents is start to investigate what would a building of that size, and when I say that size, there's actually two sizes. There's the high and the medium program square footages combined, and then there's just the high priority. We kind of looked at it in two pieces. So when we started looking at each site, each of the three sites, we were looking at them from a really high level. What kind of square footage can fit within the existing building? What kind of square footage would need to be added to get to the high and the medium priority option? Is it a small addition? Is it a, tear down? We were looking at a bunch of different super high level options. We haven't designed anything yet. We haven't put rooms in the spaces. We haven't, designed what the structure looks like. We're looking at purely from a site standpoint, what can each site accommodate, from a 30,000 foot view. And that's mainly what I wanted to review with the group today. We're going to go through each site and just understand what's the target program, what's the target square footage requirements with the parking attached to it, and from a diagrammatic standpoint, what does that look like on each site? So I'm going to share my screen and I will run through the different components. We have Phil and Brian from our team. They're the site designers. They helped put together most of the site diagrams, so they're going to kind of jump in here and there to help fill in any blanks that I might have missed. So, Jen, could you switch on the sharing for me?
Yeah, I think I did, but hold on.
There we go. It just worked.
All right, great.
All righty. So just super high level recap. Here is the Excel file that we had been playing with last time. I tried to clean it up and make it a little bit more graphic in terms of understanding green is high priority. That means we really need those spaces. The orange is medium priority. They'd be highly desirable, but could potentially be left off in case cost or size was an issue. And then the low priorities in red, that's stuff that we're not really considering at this point, in terms of planning for this new facility. So we ended up in the high priority category. We ended up with about, a little over 7,000 square feet. This is grossed up. When we say grossed up, we mean the net is the addition of all of the different square footages for each of the different rooms. The gross factor includes things like, wall thicknesses and, chases and things that aren't necessarily specifically in the room, corridors, hallways. And we get to a total that combines both of those numbers of about 7,000 square feet for both the high priority and the medium priority, give or take. So if we were to combine both of them, we got a 14,000 square foot facility. That number, again, is very high level. If this thing, changes in shape or whatnot, that number could go up or down depending on how efficient we can get it. But again, just from a diagrammatic standpoint, we're looking at this at a super high level. I updated the program to include the spaces that we removed last discussion. So we talked about a secondary lounge. There were some other spaces that we said, nope, not even on the low priority. We don't even want to consider those. So we just kind of struck through them. I added the priority list and updated at the bottom of the spreadsheet, the different square footages of each of the different priorities. Again, just to try to make it really easy to understand. So from a site evaluation standpoint, we're looking at, does the program fit? We're going to review some test fits. Can we knock out any of the options right off the bat because they don't work, logically, they don't work from a cost standpoint, they don't work from a, feasibility standpoint. And the next step would be to try to narrow this thing down into 2 sites that we'd further investigate, and we really start to drill into what is the actual design of the space. Where are the different rooms? How are they located? Are we talking about renovation only? Are we talking about something a little bit more on some of the sites? We want to get to a point today where we can move forward with a couple of different options, in an ideal scenario. So here's the target programmatic requirements. We're talking about a 15,000 square foot footprint of a single story building. We looked at a couple of scenarios of what would a 2-story building look like. That grosses up a little bit higher because we have to worry about things like stairs and elevators. But, again, just from a concept standpoint, how many parking spaces, based on our experience, would we be looking for? This is about the number of parking in the ideal scenario. And then program space for outdoors, green space and whatnot. This is graphically how that's represented: 15,000, 50,000, and 5,000. So again, high level. If we had the perfect site, how everything fit, we'd be looking at roughly 2.5 acres of overall site space to fit it. Again, we know we're not working in the ideal situation with perfectly open site, but again, got to start somewhere. Talking about the high priority, which is kind of the baseline that we're working off of. We're at about, 8,000 square feet, which would require roughly 50 parking spaces. And the outdoor program, when we're talking high priority, TBD, unknown, depending on the different sites. So really starting to hone in on what does that first option really look like. And then looking at evaluation criteria of each site. Ultimately, what we're tasked here is comparing the different sites in all different respects with all different types of criteria. Today, all we're looking at is what's the adequate building area and what's the adequate parking area. That really helps us hone in on which sites and which options should we be even looking at further. It would not make any sense to look at all these components if one of the sites really doesn't fit the building or the parking at all, and we say we want to throw that out the window. So the first step is to really look at these 2 things and see how they fit. And those are the diagrams that you're going to see coming up here. So we're going to start with the South Deerfield site. So just to orient everybody, the highlighted area here with the big A on it, that's our site. That's the Congregational Church. We have the 1888 building here with B. The E is the library. F is going back towards the ball field, and then the police and the town hall building on C and D. So that's the church site that we're looking at. Let me try to narrow this down. You can see the key and the legend, just identifying the current parking that we have on site. We have roughly combined with all of the different parcels here in this corner, we're looking at about 86 parking spaces. If we're looking at what are the upcoming projects and how do those affect our site, we have the library project and we have the proposed 1888 project that Chris and I have been going back and forth on, talking about, where is that in the process and how does that affect the other, how does that affect our parcel? So we tried to put those designs in an overlay over the existing site. So once everything, if everything worked in a perfect sequence, library gets finished, 1888 building gets finished, and then our project, before we start our project, we have about 106 parking spaces on site with the upgrades to the library and to the town hall. And again, just kind of try to gesture at what does that look like from a site plan standpoint. So this is what we're going to be working with and showing you guys is with these upcoming projects as the backdrop to, how we would look at renovating the building. So you can see here, we have the library here, we have the 1888 project here, and we're working within, a fairly small area of space. So this option is, what if we just renovated the building? How does that fit? What does that mean for parking? How could we potentially steal some space in the back and try to get as much senior center specific parking as possible? Again, this isn't even looking at how does the spaces fit within the existing structure. This is just, all right, what's the size of the building? The building's, a little bit over 7,000 square feet. Where could we find parking outside of what the town hall and what the library are giving us? And how does that stack up to the target program? So we have this yellow box that gestures at what if we put the parking in the back? We think we could get maybe 25 spaces plus or minus, with potential connection to the existing, what will be the existing parking for the library and the town hall building. And what does that mean for the program? So right here, we're looking at a target of, and this is for the medium and the high priority, but if we just said the high priority, it seems like we would meet the high priority program. But with the parking, if we're looking at about 50 spaces required for the senior center, without talking about sharing parking, we're at about 25. So we're, well below what the target parking would be for the high priority only. How does this accommodate the high and the medium priority? You can see pretty quickly we're, without modifying the existing structure, we're pretty far away from the target of the adequate building size and the parking size. The next option would be, all right, what if we, and again, these are all just high level ideas, bear with us here, but this idea would be, all right, what if we took down the church? What if we tore it down, which has basically been the recommendation of the previous consultants that did the existing building analysis. And you'll probably notice, but in our existing report, it's probably going to say something very similar, that the building has reached its end of life and would be very difficult to accommodate a senior center. So this option looks at, what if we tore the building down and put in a 8,000 square foot footprint of a 2-story senior center? What would that yield? So you can kind of see what a 2-story footprint looks like on the site. It takes up a very similar square footprint of the existing structure. Could we expand out towards the back even more than we were showing before to try to get 50 spaces for the senior center? And maybe the ball field gets rotated. I think there was a VHB study, which was another consultant that was, involved in the site in the past. Maybe the ball field gets rotated so it's still usable, and we're stealing a little bit more parking for, the senior center, specifically for the senior center. Again, not talking about shared parking, which we can get into later, but this is just looking at the senior center by itself. And then this option, which after I had more conversations with Chris from Deerfield, it was this became clear that this option really wasn't viable, but we, again, just throwing big picture ideas out there, we were like, oh, well, maybe we can tag team this onto the 1888 project, put the senior center out the back with the combination town hall, senior center building in some way, shape, or form. And maybe where the church location just becomes one large parking lot, you know, for all of the different organizations on this parcel. And but we weren't aware that that town hall project was a little bit further along than we anticipated. So we studied it, we showed it, talked to Chris, realized it really wasn't viable, but wanted to show it anyways, just as a way to say, hey, we looked at it, understand it's not viable, but you know, it was one of our studies and we thought it was worth showing. So what this did was it got us to our program for the medium and the high, and it got us pretty close to the adequate parking requirements for, you know, a 15,000 square foot senior center. So I'm gonna go through a lot here. If you guys will just bear with me, I'm gonna go through the other two schemes. They're a little bit less complicated than this one, but I'll go through all of them and then we'll come back and I'll answer any questions and we can focus on any of the options that you guys want to focus on. But let me just get through all of them and bear with me here. Actually, Brian, did you have anything else, or Doug, on this one that you wanted to add?
I'm good for now. Good for now. I think it's pretty clear that like parking is a challenge on this one.
Yeah. So then we studied Sandy Lane, which I apologize, the title up here should actually say Whately. For, you know, a little miss on our part, but this is the Sandy Lane site. The existing building, we wanted to identify, you know, how much parking is currently on site and what is the available square footage in the building currently. And this diagram just shows how that interior space is divided. As you all know, there's kind of an upper level and a lower level. This is where the loading dock is, where the lower, this quote unquote lower building is. So if you combine them, you know, we're a little bit over 5,000 square feet, but you know, more or less half of the building is down 3 feet and change, and half of the building is up 3 feet and change. So it creates a fairly difficult interior space to work with when we're talking about trying to fit a senior center into the existing square footage. So again, just to try to fit the base target program, the high priority program, we would most likely have to add to the structure to get to the 8,000, 7,000 square feet. So what would that look like? That would look like this little 3,000 square foot box off of the back. It wouldn't be terribly difficult to extend, you know, the existing structure and create more square footage. But again, we're adding space to the lower level, and we'd still have a good chunk of the space divided by that change in grade or the change in finished floor from the lower level to the upper level. We were looking at, you know, potentially if we redid the parking lot and we expanded it, you know, without doing a full layout, how much parking would that get us if we were to try to steal some more of the square footage around, you know, these green spaces here? We could potentially get up to 88, we thought, again, if we took all this area. And then we looked at what would it, you know, would it make any sense to have an additional access drive for the senior center drop off? If we were to say the new front entrance of the senior center could be here, you know, would a new drive off the backside with drop off on the passenger side, would that be helpful with a scheme like this? So just starting to dot that in and gesture at maybe adding another access drive to facilitate, you know, pick up and drop off at a front door that could potentially be located on the south side of the site. Again, just taking it a step further, if we wanted to accommodate the medium and the high priority, what would that look like on the site? Again, trying to take as much of the parking space as possible to gain more parking. Just extending that addition area off the south side of the site a little bit more, trying to create that roughly 15,000 square foot footprint. So we got the blue area here is the addition, got the lower level and then the upper level. the back area would stay green here. And we thought maybe there's a potential to steal some more parking out on the front that we could say could be staff only type of parking to try to get more senior center and more public parking towards the front door here, which we were envisioning the front door would be closer to this inside corner. We don't have that nice drop off that we were looking at on the other one, but we feel like we could potentially reorient some of the parking here to get maybe a circular pattern, a circular traffic pattern to get that drop off and get people in and out of the site in a fairly organized manner. So where does this one get us? We thought maybe we get to 93 parking spaces total with the additional staff parking up in here. You lose a little bit of green space, but we felt like there was a potential there to get and steal some more parking. And then again, just one more option to study on the optimal option, which is the medium and the high priority square footage. Maybe we put the addition off the back of the building and the extra drive aisle stays here. What would that look like? Maybe the front of the building is along this face and, we leave all the parking towards the south. We could still potentially put parking up on the front here if we wanted to. That there's no reason why we couldn't, but just an option of, all right, what if we just kept the parking down towards the south and we added towards the north? What would that look like? And that's kind of how this was yielded. So again, looking at things high level, just trying to figure out, all right, what are our priorities? Do we really want the high and the medium priorities? Here's how it would fit if we wanted to just do the high priorities. Looking at a small addition here, we don't think we could fit all the programmatic pieces into the existing footprint. So that's kind of how we're looking at this, the Whately site at Sandy Lane. And then the Sunderland site, existing conditions, we got about 48 spaces plus or minus. We have about 12,000 square feet total in the building. With this little O shape with the addition off the side. All of the structure inside is non-load bearing in terms of, existing walls and whatnot. So we could pretty much carve up the building however we wanted to. So the square footage is fairly open to, modification, but, how does that compare to the target program and the target parking? If we said just the high priority, it seems like we could fit in here. If we just did the 7,000 square feet, just the high priority list with the parking, the roughly 50 parking spaces, this one seems like it actually meets the program with very little modifications, with some space to spare on the inside of the building. If you're talking about the medium and the high priority, obviously we're not quite there. We would have to provide some type of addition off the back or in some part of the building and expand the parking off to the east, reorganize it, and potentially, add some connection for emergency access or whatever towards the back of the site. So I know that was a lot. I know there was a ton of information there that I kind of threw at you all. Doug and Brian, did you have any other pieces you wanted to add to the last two sites before we kind of turn it over to questions and answers?
I think one of the issues on this site that we would want to be looking at doing some sort of modification to the site regardless is to try to create a drop-off pickup area near a front door, and the front door may be where the front door is now, or it may be something that's changed so it's on the right-hand side. But I think we would want to try to get some drop-off pickup lane close to the building, which doesn't exist. On the previous site, maybe Chris, if you flip over back, one of the things that we don't really know at this point in time, and you may be able to give us a better understanding, or maybe you don't have an understanding of it yet either, is what seem to be the parking needs of the existing building with who's been left in that building, and what impact that might have with regard to the need for overall parking on the site. So that's kind of a question that we'd like more information on if that information is available.
was just also a comment that was brought to our attention about, Plumtree site about zoning. So I have some of our planning folks looking into the zoning question that came up about the basically existing non-conformance of the lot based on the zoning. So we'll get you an answer on that, but at this point, we don't see it as a, you know, stop point. So just wanted to update you guys on that.
Brian, do you want to explain a little bit about what that non-conformance is right now, just so the whole group has an understanding?
Yeah, so you guys know this, the property itself is a Plumtree address, which the zoning there requires 200 feet of frontage. I believe there's only 90 at most. So it's a non-conforming lot. We will do our confirmation on if we need to change that zoning or get a modification for the site, but I'll follow up with you guys on what that means as far as the zoning. It's just, as you can tell, this specific lot and use doesn't exactly fit the residential neighborhood that it currently exists in.
One of the other things, Chris, go to the next slide. The connection that we've identified as emergency access only, that was just a point of discussion that if we had 100 parking spaces on this site, you know, and there was a large event in the building, would there be an option to possibly be able to exit out of the bottom of the site and over to Plumtree rather than trying to get all 100 cars out on Plumtree at one time? So that was more of a matter of movement of vehicles and how to access the site, and whether or not even a curb cut could be put on that lower location. But that was just our thinking process on that.
So just to kind of summarize, you know, we looked at this from a standpoint of what, based on the program, fits on each site. And we totally understand, you know, we eventually have to get to some sort of reality in terms of budget and what we think that this project can actually accommodate. You know, my understanding from the beginning of the process was, you know, we were trying not to go full bore with a whole new building and a large project wasn't really the appetite. It's some of the stuff that we're showing could be perceived as a large project, but again, we're at such an early stage that we want to at least show it and talk about it and make sure that, you know, the group understands what we talked about prior. This is what the impact is. This is how it, you know, manifests itself on each site, just so the information is out there. If ultimately we decide, hey, what you guys are showing, these projects are way too big, we need to scale back on things, that's certainly some of the stuff that we want to hear and some of the stuff we need to know, so that we can start to hone in on, all right, where do we think this thing is going? Because ultimately we have to work towards the end of the year to present a final, you know, a couple of options that are much more developed than these, but, you know, we want to be able to show at that final, you know, in that final presentation or the final discussion, here are the things that we studied along the way, and here are the sacrifices that we had to make in order to get to what we think, you know, these towns are looking for, or these towns can accommodate. So with all of that kind of thrown out there on the table, we're eager to hear, you know, everybody's feedback in terms of how they think this responds to the program, how they think this aligns with their expectations, and ultimately we'd love to get some feedback as to where we should be going from here, so that we can work towards that end of the year goal of wrapping this whole thing up. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions, any comments, any feedback that you guys might have.
Okay.
Stop sharing the screen so we could all talk to each other.
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, I just wanted to say, after going on the tour with you, Chris, for those, Chris and I went to the Housing Senior Center, and met with their director, Nikki LaQuarrie. And I think having the vestibule is important because it gives people, you know, especially depending on where they're coming in, if that's where the, you know, the greeter area is, the reception area, whatever, you know, has that barrier between the hot and cold. I think that's important. because, you know, some of our numbers may be a little slower getting in. So that if we end up having a, slider door, whatever kind of door we have, you know, it may have, the heat and the cold going in and out, longer than normal, but, I think also, you know, if we wanted to cut the, employee bathroom, you know, as an option, they shared that they all use the same facility and it seemed to be clean. You know, not too bad. Everything was pretty much motion censored for that. So I think, you know, depending on what we have for those pieces, that could potentially reduce, you know, some square footage, for that space.
Mhm.
But I think everything else that you have in the high and low is, you know, or high and medium, was really where we were. And I think, you know, in my professional opinion, parking is a major issue that we have now, even at the Sunderland Congregational Church for our food distribution. You know, we are having people park at our site over here on 22 Amherst Road. Some folks are parking up by the, Sunderland Town Hall or the park and ride area and walking down if they have the ability. Parking is really essential to consider because a lot of the events that we have, for example, the food distribution, some people have stopped coming because of the limited parking. So in that space there, I think we can accommodate maybe 40 cars and staff, you know, and, parks over here at our space and volunteers have been parking in different areas as well. So having at least 80 parking spaces, I think maybe, you know, even the 100 is essential. Regardless of where we are, and, you know, with you showing what's going on in, South Deerfield, I think is a concern. If, you know, we're not doing shared parking, because we're not gonna be able to, host and meet the need. The aging population in our three communities is only increasing. It's not going to decrease, and I think everybody should be mindful of that. In the next 20 years, you're not gonna wanna revisit this again. You're barely getting people to be on board in the three towns now for a senior center, for a priority. So I think, you know, we have to look at the long-term, effect of this project. And, you know, so I think, meeting the needs, you know, we can reuse different rooms, unlike Hadley, which has rooms that are specifically purposed for certain things, you know, having multiple, activities in different rooms is great, but the parking is gonna be my biggest thing. Regardless of where we have the building, we need to look at that.
I had a couple of questions about things in Chris's uh, presentation, and I think
Yeah.
they're probably going to be pretty quick ones. I was noticing on the North Main Street, you very consistently put in like where the green space was going to be, and the green space I think was a little bit less, but not too different from what we were thinking about.
Mhm.
And except like maybe the last one doesn't have a green space in it. For the Sandy Lane, similarly, a lot of them didn't have the green space marked out, but on that site, there's a lot of other places that are kind of obvious. So I'm assuming then that at for Sandy Lane, the first two not having green space mapped out just means, oh yeah, there's that green space out front. You can see it, and that wasn't really. It's not that it doesn't say exactly how much, but it's clearly more than 5,000, which I think 5,000 was the target.
Yeah, we
the-
could have, we could have definitely showed the additional
Right.
spaces on there, but I think
Yeah.
it,
So
our thought was that the green space is ample there and we can
right,
find.
but yeah, because that wasn't a constraint, it wasn't really pointed out.
Exactly, yeah, good point.
Country Road, I guess, on the very first one, there is that big green space in the back. There's the green spaces that are kind of in the front of the existing building. Those all seem also pretty obvious that they're going to be somewhere around the 5,000 square foot, even if you put the building addition in.
Right.
There would still, you're taking 3,000 away from something that's still going to leave something like 5,000 of usable. So I just wanted to make sure that my
Yep.
assumptions about,
Yep.
oh, that's why the green space isn't labeled
Very good point. Yep, very
okay,
good point. Yeah, the
no, that's
idea was
okay.
those two,
I don't want to make assumptions that aren't that aren't what you were thinking of.
totally get it. Yep, but you're
Okay.
correct.
And this might be too much in the weeds, but looking at the 4 Sandy Lane, since that's actually the one I'm the most familiar with, what you call the upper building is actually like huge in the vertical direction.
Yes.
And if we, I mean, maybe it just makes it too complicated, but is there any thought, or is it not yet the time to think about making that into 2 stories of programming space inside the existing warehouse part of that building? I don't know if that makes sense to think about now, or if that's really something for a later time. If
So
this
it
one makes
was,
it into the cut.
I think looking at it from a high level, it would make a lot of sense to try to use that vertical space. The reality with that type of structure, it's what's called a pre-engineered metal building.
Uh-huh.
And those structures are designed, they're fairly cost effective, but they're cost effective because they're designed to the minimum requirements for what it's
Yeah.
built for. So to add anything to a pre-engineered building, like even saying, hey, add, 10 solar panels on the roof, everybody gets nervous because there's not a lot of extra structural capacity for that type of system. So to add a whole second floor is not really feasible for that type of structure. Adding on to,
Uh-huh.
against these buildings, that aren't taking any structural load, that's
Oh,
feasible.
okay.
It takes a little bit of reworking, but it's not as difficult as basically what we'd be doing is building a whole nother structure
You'd have
inside
to
the structure
build
to
the support
accommodate.
in because the walls are not meant to. Okay,
Exactly. The
understood.
foundations, the walls, yeah, everything's not designed to accommodate a whole nother floor. So you
So it's
could do
not an
it, but you
obvious
basically
go-to
be
thing.
building a structure inside of the structure.
Yeah. You'd have to be a little more pressed for space, I think.
Yeah,
It
I think
sounds
you're
like
right.
to consider that to be a
Yeah.
better option than some of the options you've laid out. Okay. Thanks. Those are the 2 questions I wrote down while we were talking. I'm gonna still keep thinking, but let somebody else ask questions.
Chris, Greg, Trevor, Pete, any initial impressions? Things you hate, things you love?
I was just gonna say, one, great job. Like, I think this presentation presented the information super clearly, the trade-offs, the challenges, the opportunities with each site. So I feel like we we have the homework done, and there's some tough decisions to be made. One thing I do want to mention, obviously, with the 1888 project, if that moves forward, the building I'm currently in, the current town offices for the town of Deerfield, that's another question mark. So I don't know if that's something to consider in terms of parking or actual, senior center space. I don't want to throw like another option at you guys at this point. But I do think that adds kind of another layer of flexibility to the sort of municipal campus we have here in South Deerfield. So just wanted to throw that out there.
I had a question, Greg Snedeker, I'm the new ATA here in Deerfield, so thanks for letting me join. Just curious, what is the plan for public transportation for for this new facility? Is there any discussions regarding any public transit going to be, have it be a drop-off area, pickup?
Yes, actually, I've been working with, hi Greg, I'm Jen Remiller. I'm the director here at the center. We've been working with the PVTA and the FRTA to try to bridge the gap between the transportation issue here. We have a really good partnership with the PVTA that's ongoing, and we've already spoken with them. Their service area includes Sunderland, so they would be able to add a stop for the Sunderland space there, over in the Plum Tree Road space. In regards to the Whately space, for the 4 Sandy Lane, that we just have to determine, because I believe Whately is just solely FRTA. But so we would be able to provide transportation over for that particular space. Hopefully with a ongoing discussion between the FRTA and the PVTA. Now, in regards to the North Main Street space, there is some transportation in the center of town, but it doesn't bump up that far. So, that's an ongoing conversation. I think we're currently just starting a project with the PBTA and we're doing some service. We're adding to the service area here in Sunderland to go all the way up to Greenfield. But we're not bumping over into, going through Route 5 through South Deerfield for that. They're using the highway option. But that's, also a discussion of a joint grant with the PBTA and the FRTA. It's been an ongoing issue, and one of the ways that we've been able to circumvent some aspect of that is we just received CIPC funds from each of the 3 towns to put the 20% for a new vehicle or new van that we're supposed to get possibly next year or in 2026, depending on the delivery point. But we're also in talks with the PBTA to partner to get them to basically support us getting another vehicle without having to do a match through this grant process cycle. And we've been able to offer transportation. At this point, being in this location, we've had more folks attend the center on public transit than we have and the other location in South Deerfield when we were at the Holy Family Parish, which is before we came here. Prior to that, I'm unaware because there was no statistical data really captured prior to me starting. So, that is a concern we have, and we're trying to, look at all the facets. I think the biggest solution will be having a target space, and then we'll be able to expand that conversation. But we've also done programs to have people learn how to ride the bus too, or public transit, which has really been helpful.
Just kind of related to that, Doug or Chris, I'm curious. So have you guys worked on any senior centers that have sort of shared parking with other facilities? And, how did that work? Did it work? I'm just curious to hear.
We have, I guess the real issue with parking and just time and time again, parking ends up becoming the tail wagging the dog on these projects. And as Jennifer said, they don't have enough parking and she's visited other facilities. I don't know any senior center that's ever said, oh, we have so much parking, it's wonderful. The problem with shared is it goes both ways. If the library's got a big event going on, all of a sudden they're parking in the senior center parking lot as well. And the issue with senior centers is predominantly everybody comes in their own car and most people are one car, one person. You add public transportation, and there are people who are going to take public transportation, but if it's convenient to get to a bus stop to get on it. Otherwise, they want to go to their garage or their driveway and get in their car and get to the senior center. Additionally, if we create a better, bigger senior center, more people may take public transportation, but more people are going to want to come to the senior center. So the bottom line is, I don't know that we've ever seen a flawless shared parking situation. And at the town campus, if we've got police and town hall and library and senior center, and there's a public meeting going on at town hall and the library has some special event going on and the senior center's there, all of a sudden nobody's going to have enough parking. It's that kind of thing. So it's very cautious to assume certain overlaps, because there are going to be times when it's going to fail significantly. And the old adage from parking is, you don't plan for Easter Sunday when you design a church. But senior centers, because of what they are and the people who are coming, and hopefully more people are coming, that demand is always going to be high.
And the facility that Jennifer and I toured down in Hadley, Mass, there is a pseudo shared parking situation there. We have, our site our building is located on the same parcel as the new library. Those projects actually were constructed at the same exact time. And there's a parking lot that's connecting the two. And we spent a lot of time designing that area with the design team from the library group. And, I was talking to Jane, one of the select board members, and the senior center director there when Jennifer and I were down there, and they definitely have, issues when there are large events planned for both, the library and the senior center. And, is it every single day that they have issues? No, but there's, a handful of times throughout the year where there's, serious parking constraints, and it limits what they can or can't do. And it just makes everybody's life a little bit more difficult in terms of coordinating and, compromising and, whatnot. So like Doug said, is it impossible? No. Have we found a flawless situation? That's also a no, unfortunately. So that's just the reality.
And one of the things we did also down in Chicopee, the Chicopee parking lot was oversized. We planned for it to be oversized because we were planning for the future, and there was discussion about the possibility of adding adult daycare to that site, and also the trail that runs along the river there and runs through town. We wanted that site to also be a general parking area for people that wanted to use that trail, bring their bikes and use that trail. And even with that parking lot has absorbed the amount of parking that's necessary for that site. So in the future, if they do go ahead and add an adult day facility on that parcel, there still probably is enough, because of adult day is people being dropped off and picked up rather than people driving their own cars. But it was something that was taken into account, and I think it still will absorb what's necessary there. But we didn't want to make that any smaller, because the trail and the bikes and all of that are certainly going to continue to be popular, and that's a great place where people can go and park to go and get access to that as well.
We have added, or in the midst of adding, the Leary lot, which is not far from the Deerfield campus, for people in town that are able to walk to the library or different things like that. So we'll have some excess parking there. Parking looks like it's a mess everywhere. So these are all really good plans, just trying to figure out what's the most feasible, what's the most doable with money that we have or don't have.
Right.
And just trying to get something to happen. We've been homeless for years here, and we've just got to kind of come up with something that's the most feasible thing. And then we're going to always struggle with one aspect of it, one way or the other. I don't think there's a perfect option, because we don't have a 5-acre lot that's empty that we can just drop a building on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of struggling, finding out which one is most available, most feasible, most, reasonable to get going in the next year or two.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I can help kind of guide the discussion a little bit. What are your general thoughts now that you've seen what a purely high priority building would look like on each site versus a high and medium priority building? What is the group's thought on which direction you think we need to go in terms of, what's the building that we're designing to? Is it a 8,000 square foot building, or is it a 15,000 square foot building? Is there any thoughts on that topic?
Well, I think we need a 15,000, but I don't know that's gonna pass the town meeting. I just don't see 15,000 passing, but I don't know.
I sort of feel at the moment, we don't really have enough information to know whether something's going to be like too expensive or have some other feature that would make it tank at town meetings, because we don't really have numbers on any of these, because
Sure.
we're still at the high level. So
Understood.
we're trying to look at, my understanding is we're trying to look at this high level and say, where are we most likely to find something where we'll satisfy enough of the needs that people will support it within a budget where we can somehow manage it. And I kind of I was like, when you're looking at the plum tree circle, I'm just like, oh, can we go take another look at that medium priority list? And so make that into medium 1 and medium 2, because at Plumtree, it looks like it would be relatively straightforward to
Sure.
uh, put some of those in the existing space. And but then parking is the thing there, and then we have to kind of deal with that in whatever is the best way. I guess at the risk of sounding like, completely uninformed about everything, that people are mostly understanding about parking when it's related to events. That like we used to have our town meeting in our old town hall when there was like almost no parking along Main Street. There's like a teeniest tiniest parking lot there. And then we just had cars lined up on either side of the main road. And you would never put up with that every day. But everybody's like, yeah, it's town meeting. Of course there's gonna be 100 cars parked. And people would carpool. And so when there were big events, we put up with it and kind of find a way. So and everybody's seems pretty okay. And I'm gonna say everybody because I'm never going to talk to everybody, but by and large, people were okay with that. I think one of the differences here is that we're often dealing with mobility impaired people, so there should be a way to drop people off closer.
Yeah.
And they may or may not be driving. Many of them are not driving. And then their transportation, if they need to park, can be a little further away. So I guess um I'm not as worried about public support for a place that maybe on paper doesn't have enough parking for Easter Sunday, for lack of a better word, or town meeting day. Um, Mostly because I think that's what people are thinking about here. So in that sense, the shared parking most of the time works, and when it doesn't, it's usually predictable when that's going to happen because people advertise their events. So that's my completely uninformed and ill-considered thoughts on the parking part. I sort of feel like, yeah, I mean, in a way, you're sort of asking us to eliminate maybe one of these pieces, and
Okay.
that and I guess with public transit is always a tricky thing because its funding is not very, we don't have a history of great funding for public transit. And it is definitely, public transit around here is really just getting from Greenfield to Northampton, Amherst to that parking lot up in the north corner of Whately there. It's really just going through on the major roads. It's not getting somebody from their home in West Whately down to the senior center. So I don't want to say public transit isn't important because I love it when I'm in Stockholm, but we're not Stockholm. And nobody's, we just don't have convenient public transit that's likely to serve a large number. So while I think we should work to change that, that's just what reality is. And that's been that way since 1993 or 1994 when I first moved here. So I don't think citing with respect to public transit is necessarily a big priority for the decision we make today either. And that's unfortunate. And I say that as somebody who would really, really like to use public transit to go to my senior center. But it's never going to get me from the top of the hill in Westbrook Road over to whatever senior center, any of these sites. In some sense, the Plumtree Road seems like the site that could do the most with the least change, and change is what costs money. So I feel like that should be on there. That said, I know one of the other things, I'm scrolling on the thing on your PDF.
Yep.
I know when we start to look at other evaluation criteria, the location of that is going to be an issue. It's set right there to serve Amherst.
The movie been Turkey, right? Does it cost anything? No, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
One thought, Brand brought up here, which I thought was a good idea, was, I never even thought of it. It's, designing North Main Street to have diagonal parking.
Yeah, it is
That's a
nice.
lot of
Yeah.
lots. I mean, North Main Street, you could land at 747 on, and,
Different spot of flower.
so that's a thought.
Yeah, yeah.
Just to throw out there, because I thought that was a
Very nice.
good thought.
Yeah. So to me, in the back of my mind, this location thing, this central location is,
Feel a lot better.
you didn't put it in the number one. So if we're just looking at building area and capacity, it looks really good, but it also, it's, the proximity, it's not that centrally located. And that's my only reservation about it. I really love a lot of other
Sure.
things about that space.
Well, what you're saying makes a lot of sense in terms of kind of how I've been, evaluating these
Yeah.
things. Is Sunderland just saying, all right, we understand to meet the program, we got to add parking and add square footage, but what if one of the options is, all right, fit as much as you can in there, we'll deal with the parking, and like that's option one, right? Option one is Sunderland with the least amount of impact as possible, fit as much as you can, that's it. Right, and then we'll start to look at all the other criteria. Option two, Sandy Lane and, the South Deerfield site, those have similar challenges in terms of building area, right? Where the existing structure, and I'd like to talk more about that maybe in a minute here, but the existing structure there, in our opinion, just it's going to be really difficult to say, let's renovate the church and turn it into a nice senior center. I think that needs to, we need to talk about that more, but in our mind, it's almost like a start over there. We'll certainly look at renovating it if you guys really, really want us to, and you think that the town would not support, something new in that location, but that's tricky. But then you go to the Sandy Lane one and there's only 5,000 square feet available. Even if that space is usable and it is, fairly new, we would have to add something onto it. So both of those sites have building issues. So
Yeah.
maybe some of the other evaluation criteria comes into play here where everybody says, all right, if it's going to take a decent amount of modification to these two structures at these two sites to make the building area work, what other criteria could we look at to maybe narrow things down? Maybe that central location makes the South Deerfield site, more desirable than the Sandy Lane site if both require building updates. And it swings it into, all right, South Deerfield is the plan where we got to modify the building more. Sunderland is the plan where we're limiting things as much as possible. And let's see where that takes us. Like that's kind of how I'm thinking we should be tackling this, but that's just kind of how I've been looking at it.
And I guess the only thing I'd add to that is that if in the end, cost will be a big factor.
Of course.
The cost in Sunderland starts from the cost of the building, then whatever renovations interior need to happen. So if we try and do something with like existing building to fit as much of our high and medium priorities as we can, if that were one ask, and then the other locations, I think you would not have just an existing building. You'd want to say existing building plus, and why not make it the 15,000? Because those are spaces where the land is already owned, and that would not be an additional cost.
Correct.
So that those ones are sort of starting from that sort of advantage. So even though additional structure means additional cost, there isn't a purchase price there, pushing the whole thing up. And it's so I think that's not an unfair thing to do, is to say, hey, if we do either the Whately or the Deerfield sites, let's at least consider something that will meet the medium and high priorities both. So the 15,000 square foot plans would be the ones that would be worth getting an estimate on. Because if you're going to put something on, I don't think putting something bigger on doesn't double the price necessarily. The starting the construction and owning the land, I think in those two cases really that is the advantage of those spaces compared to Sunderland. And
Correct.
their location is much more central. That's the other advantage over Sunderland, but I don't have a good idea about the cost of the building. How much does that compare? And that might be the only way to do it, is to actually go in and say, look at these. And I don't know how many we're allowed to make you look into here. From my point of view, as many as possible, but it seems like if we were to like if we were to pick kind of one among the various things you proposed in South Deerfield, one of the several things you have proposed about Sandy Lane, and one of the things you proposed at Plumtree Road, would that be within our scope of work? Because earlier somebody mentioned, you're narrowing it down to 2 sites, but if we
Yeah.
were really specific about which kind of plan, would 3 sites still be on the table?
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought our scope was to study all 3, multiple options for all 3. And then for the final, which was, putting together a pretty picture as to what the site would look like, do a full interior plan, do a full cost estimate, do a full site plan design. I believe that was just to do a detailed design on 2 sites.
I believe you're correct there, Chris. And I know we only have the $75,000 grant to work with at this point, so yeah, I would keep
Okay.
that restrained. Just one thing I wanted to add, because I know, Chris, you had asked about the raw square footage. And I think Joyce's point is well taken. Without, dollar figures attached to that, it's a little hard to actually get a sense. I will say, I don't think I mentioned these square footages to anyone without the 15,000 square feet getting kind of a double take. People have been sort of shocked by that size. So just something to keep in mind. I think there's been a sort of general reaction, hey, the high priority only is maybe a little bit more palatable for folks.
Understood.
I would just like to share though, I think how you're gonna get the buy-in from the community is look at what we were able to accomplish in increasing membership by just being at the Holy Family Parish Church. I mean, we went from 124 members when I started in January of 2022 to over almost 500. I don't have the exact number now. I know earlier this year was 471, but we've added more members, even being in just the spaces that we're limited to at this point. And with the aging population, 15,000 square feet for 3 towns is not unheard of. If you were gonna use one town, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, Monty, Nikki LaQuarrie shared and Jane, talked about, the population for older adults within Hadley is close to 5,000 or around there. And we, at 3,300 now, that's just using 2020 census numbers. That is, just gonna get up to probably close to 5,000 by the time you hit another 10 years. Because, they don't look at they don't change the schematics based on the ages, with most of the state, data points. But I know that we had a lot of folks who are on the cusp of hitting that 60 mark. And yes, some people pass away, but we're also looking to bring in younger, older adults, by offering things maybe at a later time or different things like that, regardless of where we end up. So I think, even if he's limited down to 12,000 square feet for tangible space, and then, including the 5,000 for outdoor space, isn't unheard of when you're looking at the volume of folks. Now, I understand a lot of people go, well, how do you, bring people in? I've brought in over $411,000 in grant money since I started. And right now we have increased, thank you, Joyce. We've increased, a lot of different capabilities. We're giving people digital access to be able to do hybrid programming with us. So we have people taking, fine art classes now. So we are broadening the scope. We're not just doing, hey, come in and, glue fuzzy eyeballs or, fluffy things on a little craft thing. We're bringing programs that people want, people that are really enjoying, they're broadening their horizons. And we're really reducing isolation, because if you also look at the statistical data, our solo agers, our numbers are also increasing. So people are looking for ways to create connection and reduce isolation. And that has been my main goal since I started, and increasing the visibility. Last year when we did our postcard mailer, I had folks calling me who had lived in Sunderland and Whately for one for 15 years, one for 20, who never knew a senior center existed. So by doing that, we're reaching people, we're bringing folks in, we're connecting with lower income people by offering a partnership with the DTA for SNAP. So we're not just, a place to go and have coffee. We're getting ready to show a movie today. We have a ton of different things going on. And I think people need to broaden their perspective when they think of a senior center. We could also consider a name change of older adult or an adult community center. I know Long Meadow went for that, because the highest priority in the most recent needs assessment we had, which was presented in May of 22, was movement and fitness. So broaden your perspective and your horizons, and, get people to look at all of that. It's not just coming to, chat with your friend, although we do encourage that. It's, to engage and create, new abilities for folks, no matter what their age is. So.
Yeah, I think, Jennifer, I mean, your point to all of that, and to your credit, you're a very progressive thinker when it comes to expanding. I mean, there are a lot of senior center directors that sit around and don't understand how to get more people through the door. But 15,000 square feet today is on the small side. And I think one thing, I mean, I'm talking nationally and what we've seen over the years, but the one question that we always get, and Chris and I have had this conversation many times, is that do you size your senior center based on your population or based on the size of your town? And the answer is no. You base your senior center on your activities, your programs, and the services that you're offering, and that's going to expand the amount of people that are coming to the senior center, and that's what brings people in. And it's just, I'm hoping it never happens, but every senior center we design, there's always somebody saying it's too big. Why are we spending that kind of money on a building this size? Of course, there's always the people who say we have a great senior center now. Why do we need another one? Ultimately, if we cut the parking count based on what we normally figure, but they don't have enough parking and their membership just continues to go up year after year after year. We were talking to a director yesterday of a senior center we designed 8 or 9 years ago, and every year they increase their membership. And as a result of that, every year they increase their daily attendance as well. And it just continues to go on and on. With that said, we knew they didn't have enough parking when we designed the building, but it was the piece of land they had, like we're talking here. The parking issue becomes more and more of an issue every single year because more and more people are coming and they're expanding their hours. They're open on the weekends now to try to expand their hours. And that's a good thing. But when you do that, then more people even come, because there are people who are working for a living and people that like the idea of coming on the weekends. So it's, you're kind of going on faith that that's going to happen, but I have yet to see it not happen.
Joyce, to go back to what you were saying, which was you'd really like to see some cost information on some of these things that we're talking about here. We might be able to come up with a compromise in high level, rough order of magnitude, not fully designing things, but saying, all right, based on our data, what does renovation square foot cost? So if we're saying we're going to renovate 3,000 square feet, what is that general cost per square foot? We could probably tweak it a little bit and say, all right, if that plus a 5,000 square foot addition, what would that square foot cost be based on our data? You know, that's another, you know, chunk of change. We could potentially identify, you know, really high level costs for each option to say, this is roughly where you're going to be, just so we can start to compare things that
Yeah.
might, you know, the decision a little bit more. So maybe that's something that we could do, and then we can narrow things down further to
Yeah.
basically, because I don't think that the design, you know, what the building looks like is going to be a decision-making factor. It's cost, it's what program can you fit and what parking can you fit. Those are kind of the main things at this point,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So if we could add that cost piece to the equation to a few of these, I would say we wouldn't want to price all of them out, but if you guys could narrow things down a little bit more, maybe one per site, we could I could work with my cost estimator to pull some data and say,
Right.
all right, each one of these is gonna project cost, which we wouldn't want to say construction cost only, we'd want to put project cost, because that's what you were saying, Joyce, about purchasing that
Yeah.
the Sunderland site, like that's gonna be part of the project cost. It's not gonna be the renovation cost, that's the hard cost, but
Right.
we'll break it all down for you and say, all right, project cost all in, what does it cost for each of the options that we picked for these sites? Add that to the equation and say, all right, can we now narrow things down into two based on how these things are comparing? Would that make it a little bit easier for the group to?
I think
so.
that might be helpful, because I
Okay.
mean, you think renovating an old building and renovating a new building like in Whately, and renovating, I guess that's also a relatively new building, but a different kind of building in Sunderland. I imagine per square foot renovation cost is different in those cases, though I can imagine the two new buildings being more similar. The old, but that's the thing in some ways that I in the back of my mind I'm worried about. There's lots of things I like about the location, especially of the South
Right.
Deerfield site. But and I'm not even that much worried about the parking, because there are just lots of there's multiple options there. And there's you know, and if you walk just a little bit further up the street, if we expand that radius just a little bit, between all the entities there that are sharing parking, I think that I'm less worried about the parking. But the thing I am more worried about is the ability to renovate that old building, and the cost involved there being probably to me that's, it's like, oh, that could be like $1 million, $1 billion, right? You sort of feel like, and I don't, and it's not based on data though. And maybe you have a little bit more, while it's still high level, you've got data on renovating old buildings versus renovating relatively new buildings that might help understand. Because right now, if I look at like Sandy Lane and Deerfield, which are kind of more centrally located, if it's just square feet, you're building similar amount of extra square feet, and it just seems like I'm not sure I can decide on, like, are those costs really the same? And maybe you can have a little more nuanced input on it. Does that make sense?
I would tend to like to see too, like, okay, it costs this much to renovate that building in South Deerfield versus the cost to take it down and put something new up. You know, how dramatically different that is, because I know people are attached to that building. I just don't think structurally it's sound enough to do a second floor in there, a lot like a metal building. You know, I know we're fixing some of the rafters right now, but everyone wants to hang on to it, but hang on to it for what? An empty space? I mean, what are you gonna do with it? So I just structurally, engineer wise, I need to get people to understand what's truly feasible. Sure, you can renovate it and fit 10 people in because the floor is really rough. And you can't just support the floor. Concrete information on why that building must stand or must go is really important to this whole aspect of what we can do there.
Yeah.
And,
I agree completely, Trevor, that I think in order to, I mean, because that is not going to work unless the people in Deerfield are behind it, and that's not going to happen unless people have good information. And it might be that under no conditions do people ever want to tear down that church. If that's the case, then our options are
exactly.
right. That would, I mean, and so I guess right now what I'm hearing from you is it's not necessarily the case that under no condition will that church come down. I mean, in spite of the fact, I know you've put money into it for the restrooms and the various other things that you've done, and it may be that people don't wanna waste that.
Right.
But so I was kind of thinking it'd be really hard to get people behind tearing down that building.
Unless we have good figures, we just need realistic understanding of what's possible, what's not possible. And then
Sure.
what are you gonna do with the building? We have
Okay,
two now.
That's
but
gonna be, it's gonna be,
I'll-
I mean, even if the numbers come out, I think that's gonna be hard.
It
But
could be,
I appreciate the job you have in front of you there, is all I'm
yeah.
saying.
yeah, we gotta figure out how to tackle that one. Cause there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of nuance to that option
Yeah,
specifically.
But I think people understand, I mean, the big sentiment that I'm hearing is people want a permanent home for the senior center. A lot of people feel that the seniors have been left behind for a very long time. The seniors are starting to get really antsy and restless. A lot of people are very disappointed in Deerfield for moving forward with the 1888 project, in place of doing something for the seniors. And I think, that's gonna be something to overcome as well. In looking at all of those options. So, but as you can see, like, we don't have a private meeting area. We're getting ready for a movie, so we've got lots of people meeting in and out here. So having different spaces would definitely be helpful for everything.
I'll supply the pitchforks and torches if you want.
Oh,
I
you
can
will?
supply pitchforks
Great.
and Torches.
I've
Come
had
to a
some
meeting.
seniors, actually talk about picnic and other things, and I encourage them to do what they want with their voice, they're reaching out, their select board members, their NMC members, because, I have study
He
after
was there, but
study
I was come back.
in my desk, and, other community members have shared, and it's been almost 40 years for a center that actually is not, that's functional, people, and things like that.
How are you today?
So just wanna share that.
Nice and warm. Looks like we're gonna get ready to watch a movie
Yeah.
apparently. So we wanna
Yes,
continue,
you
we
can.
can do that. Otherwise, we're gonna stay now.
No, you can.
Motion to adjourn,
So, that's okay, sit wherever you like. Sorry, just be careful of the cord.
Do you all think that it comes down to the Deerfield site, whether you renovate or new, like that's one option, and it's Sunderland versus Whately for kind of the two slots? Does it seem like maybe that's a
To
battle
me,
right now, or
it's
am I?
not, to me, it's not obvious.
No,
yeah,
I
but
got you,
that's-
but like, if we're talking about battling for certain spots, like the small option would be Whately versus Sunderland, right? Versus the Deerfield option, which it seems like everybody wants to be in Deerfield, like that's the central location. Like, so how can we make that site work, whether it's a new building or a renovated building?
Yeah.
Like, it seems like that, purely because of the location, it sounds like we go in that direction. Is that
I think
not?
I think to me, there's a lot of big question marks on cost in Deerfield. And I think there's places with new construction might both be better options than trying to rebuild on old construction. So I don't know if your little cost estimator, how much time that takes a person to do. But it sounds like Trevor would like to know, tear down and rebuild project, just add-on project. And then for Whately, I think we could probably kind of choose among the ones you presented here and come up with one of the either, I'm thinking do the larger square footage ones. I don't know if I would do, or maybe it wouldn't matter for the big picture, adding on 1,000 square foot in either of those configurations. If we had like a big picture, it'll be a relative cost, right?
Yeah.
And for Plum Tree Road, I would almost, I mean, maybe to make it completely equivalent, we'd want to say, do the one with the 15,000 square foot. It doesn't commit us to build that, right? But if we did that, if we did those four and got like your big ballpark cost, I mean, if it turns out that building on the new is that much cheaper, then maybe we go into more detail on the two that are new. If it turns out that one of those options in Deerfield is going to be more cost competitive, maybe because of the location, we would do that. But to me, it's not obvious where, say, those four options that I just mentioned, where they're going to rank. Some of them could be double the cost of others.
Well, I
And
think that's a good point. Maybe for this exercise, it's just apples to apples. So we pick the 15,000 square foot option across the board.
yeah,
Just to say what is, so that we're not comparing apples to oranges. And then to your
Yeah.
point, that helps understand the comparison from one to the other. And then we can say, all right, we're not going to do the 15,000 square foot option at Sunderland. What is that? We're gonna go
Right.
down that road, but we're not gonna do the 15, we're gonna do the 12 or whatever it is. Like we can start to hone in on which option we're gonna go with.
The other thing I just want to mention briefly about location, the Whately space is not far from the North Main Street space.
Yeah,
So
they're very
that's-
close. They're both very central.
The Plumtree Road one is further away. So if central location is a big concern, I think, definitely doing the comparison between the new build with Whately and with South Deerfield.
I want to second that too. I feel like we should be setting what our priorities for success are, and location is going to be a prime indicator of the success of a new senior center. And unfortunately, if that Sunderland lot were located anywhere else, regardless of the non-conformance, it would be great, but it is not located in a prime location for the three communities or the residents of the three communities. I feel like if we are to reduce a site, it would be removing Sunderland from the option.
Yeah, I guess because we in our minds we have that other central location as a really important
Sure.
thing besides the two that you're concentrating on.
Well, and that's important for us to hear. We haven't really spent too much time talking about the location standpoint besides what Pete just said, which is his opinion. Sunderland is not really an option. So, I mean, does anybody else feel like that sort of not disqualifies it, but it puts it lower on the priority list purely because of the location?
Well, I think,
But
so
if
one
it,
thing, oh, go ahead.
sorry, if
Joyce.
it were to come in at like 50% of the cost of anything else, then yeah, but I don't think that's going to happen. And it seems like, well, there's not, the Sunderland Board of Oversight members not here, and I sort of feel like, just like when you're at committee meetings and you volunteer the people who weren't there to go do stuff. Well, this is sort of the opposite, where we're volunteering to drop that site off. I sort of, I feel like if it's not difficult to get that kind of ballpark cost, then it's probably worth getting on that apples to apples comparison. But
Sure.
I think I agree with what Pete just expressed, and a lot of seniors have expressed that as well.
I think the pure like renovation square foot costs, addition square foot costs, that's fairly simple. I think what Trevor was looking for, which was the structural integrity question at the church, is a little bit trickier. So I'm gonna have to be creative in terms of how do we, again, without designing this
Right.
stuff, it's really hard to say what are we doing.
But I'd say
But
be conservative then.
sure, and that's
Right.
what I'm thinking is
Yeah.
we'll make a lot of assumptions, which I hate doing, but I think at this point that's all we can do. Make an educated guess as to what we would need to do, and we'll put some safety factors on there. We'll be conservative and say, all right, this is what we're thinking needs to happen, without the knowledge of what exactly we'd be required to do, which makes me a little bit nervous. But I think for this exercise, I think, as long as everybody understands that it's just an exercise in comparison, that we're fine with not having the detail, because there's no way to do it at this point.
Right. Are you also going to include the soft costs based on square footage?
I'm sorry?
The soft costs ballpark for the interior, all of that stuff?
Yeah, typically we apply, percentages, industry standard percentages to construction costs. It's a pretty safe bet at this point to include contingencies and, if there's furniture costs and design costs and like there's other pieces of a total project that we would want to throw in there. So that will be in there as well. And the percentage might change from site to site because Sunderland's going to be a little bit higher because you need to purchase the property, but we will have that in there as well. And we'll do our best to hone in as much as possible specifically for each site so that it's not just a percentage across the board. There's specific site factors, built into those soft costs.
Well,
Thank you.
since, I'm not as attractive or talented as Annette Benning, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I will second that motion. So our official meeting is over. What's our, so Chris, you have a good idea of what we want to hear back, and that might come in an email?
Yeah, if you guys are okay with it, if I could maybe share the information as soon as I get it, and then I don't know if you think it'd be simple enough to take the numbers, I'll put an explanation to it, but I'll send you the
Yeah.
numbers. You take all the information we presented today, and
Yeah.
if you want to get together as a group with us to talk about it, that's fine. If you guys want to talk kind of, amongst yourselves, that would be fine
Okay.
too. How do you
Board of
envision-
Oversight is going to meet this Saturday. Is there any chance of getting numbers by Saturday?
I could probably whip something up by then.
Okay.
Great.
So I'll share that if you guys have your Board of Oversight discussion, and then maybe just let us know if you want to have a follow-up meeting, or if you want to just email me with your decisions, or however you guys want to move forward with us, you let us know and we'll handle it any way you guys want.
Sounds
Great.
good.
Yeah, and for anybody watching, it's 10 a.m. on Saturday at the 22 Amherst Road site, and we'll also have the hybrid option, which is on the agenda.
And one more thing to mention before we all disband. Jennifer and I and another colleague of mine have a public outreach event scheduled for, I believe, 2 weeks from today.
October 2nd. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've been advertising in the newsletter. We've been handing out flyers, and the reporter is going to be doing an article for us.
Right.
To get more publicity. So
So we got a survey. We'll be there for a few hours just to answer any questions from people, and we also have a focus group that Jennifer and I have to plan a little bit further. But there'll be a few, specific people that we'll sit down with and go through some exercise and do some fun activities. So it'll be a fun day.
Great.
Great.
Alrighty.
Thank you all.
so much.
Hey,
Thanks,
thanks,
everybody.
everybody.
Appreciate the
Thank you.
feedback.